I bought some more Gibson Kalamazoo history. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. I woke up to an email one morning saying, hey, I've got some good stuff, give me a call. Now, normally, I'm not big on calling people. I've got a heavy schedule every single day making this show. But there were 3 keywords in the title of that email that made me break that rule. The Les Paul. If you need a quick refresher on what one of those things is, it's the fanciest Gibson Les Paul ever produced in the 1970s. It's essentially the birth of the really fancy art guitars, having the flame maple on the top, having the laminate edges of the similar material. It's all beautiful Austrian maple on every single example, and they only made approximately 77 of these, and they just have awesome one-piece figured necks, all the fanciest appointments. If it could be made out of wood, it was. They had these multi-bound fretboards with abalone fretboard markers. And that's right, you do get the wooden binding as well as the wooden switch tip, poker chip, pickup rings, pick guard, knobs. These things are just really cool. But 59 of them were done up in this cool natural finish. That number is easy to remember because, 1959, very significant in Gibson terms. The one that's hard to remember is 18 wine reds. They're not quite as fantastic in my opinion, but sometimes you can find some really cool looking ones because the color of the rosewood binding will vary on every example. This is actually Steve Howe's old guitar if you would like to learn about this one. Or you can check out this interview that I had with Steve talking about his old guitar. So we're talking about the super ultra fancy boys today. So let's start with what is in here. We have new old stock the Les Paul tuners. We'll have to break out the fine handling gloves today. So the Les Paul utilizes Gibson's highest end tuner at the time, the Schaller designed M6. So the tuner body itself is honestly not that fantastic. However, they utilize the Keystone mother of pearl buttons. I mean, that's real pearl. It's not pearloid like it's used today on like some of the Les Paul Ultimas. So to find a set of these new old stock is, quite fascinating. Now, I don't think this is actually the original box for this particular set, but this is what the Schallers would come in if you were buying them aftermarket. They were made in Germany and called the M6s. But Gibson really didn't do the whole mother of pearl or pearloid tips very often. This is the beginning of all that. However, in 1980, there was a version of the 335S that also utilized a similar looking one. I have a used set of those in my collection, but you can actually see the shaft through the material. And these are not real pearl, but they look pretty good for pearloid. You'll find something similar to this on the Antique Natural Spotlight Specials. But notice you have the regular Schaller heads on them, not the Keystone. So that's what makes these really special. And one thing to know about the Steve Howe the Les Paul is he actually changed out the tuner tips on his for the Grover Butterbean Imperials. But he left the original tuners alone. So in my interview, I asked him if he happened to have his pearl buttons yet. And he said he would look, and unfortunately he came up dry. So I technically could restore this guitar now if I wanted to, thanks to this purchase, but I'm not going to. This is a part of his history. I think I'm going to switch the boxes on these because this one was much better preserved over the ages and has the nice plastic over it. But I did find this hiding in it. Somebody got a fantastic deal on those and made a huge return selling it to me. Who cares? I'm just happy to have them. But next, get a load of these. It's a new old stock set of the Les Paul knobs. These are very unique knobs in their own right because they actually have like a domed edge to them. See how they curve in over here? That's unlike any other Gibson speed knob style, and these actually left the factory with more of a satin sheen to them, and these do indeed have that finish over it. But you can see the metal insert that they put in there to put it on the pot shaft. It's not very common for people to remove these from a the Les Paul, so there's a limited buyer pool for this type of item, unless you want to put it on a different guitar. But very cool to see the rosewood wood grain on these. Because as I was telling you earlier, some of the rosewood parts are lighter or darker, so maybe someone would want to customize. This one's got a cool eye wood grain formation. But we'll come back to these in a little bit, because we need to take a look at this tiny thing now. Look at this, a new old stock the Les Paul nut. TLPs have a very interesting compensated nut. It's sculpted out in between it. It's a bone and wooden material made of 4 different layers. So what we have right here is literally new old stock, not even completed and finally shaped yet. They just have the rough scalloping done to it, but you can see the sandwich construction. That is pretty sweet. But you can't have a new old stock nut without one of these. A truss rod cover. Awesome. It does have the satin finish over it too. Now, unlike the knobs, there's a lot of TLPs out there that did not get the wooden truss rod cover because towards the end of the run, they ran out of the fancy parts, like the nut and the truss rod cover, so they'll swap them out for brass parts. But all the ones with the wooden appointments, they all vary because, staining techniques and the wood grain. I'd imagine this one might have been rejected because it's kind of hard to read it. The red layer in between just wasn't very pronounced. I'm not quite sure if this one has the full beveled edge yet. So this one also might have just been in production and they just decided, nah, not quite there. But here's what the back of this one looks like. So those are cool to see together. Now, so far, it's all been cosmetic stuff. You could make something similar. However, what you can't recreate again is the sound of a The Les Paul. Check this out. Yeah, this is what made me go, yeah, I need to buy one of these, because when are you ever going to find a The Les Paul pickup with the original wooden surround? So what's unique about these is the fact that it has a three-legged design. Now, it's very crude how they did it. They just soldered another leg onto a regular T-top of the era, so it's not necessarily a special pickup, but it is a pickup with tons of sales data behind it. So that's why I had a price reference as to how much I would want to pay for these kinds of items, because you could put this in anything. You can take the pickup ring off, you could desolder the other leg, but my intentions are not to ever use this. Now, these were advertised to me as new old stock. However, I would bet they've been in something at some point in time. And yes, I said they. I've got a complete set here. Now, he said these were in somebody's parts drawer for a long time, and they got kind of scratched up, jostling against other things. So, unfortunately, well, it looks like the bridge pickup position is a little bit scratched. For me, it's about having that finished rosewood pickup ring. Then the inside is correct as unfinished. But being potential factory rejects or parts that were ran off with at the factory, I wanted to make sure they work, so he did take readings for me, but let's double check them. Our first one should be 7.87. I measure 7.72, but you know what? It matters what temperature you take the reading at. So I believe he did get that. Next one should be 7.8. I get pretty much the exact same, 7.79. So they do indeed still function, which is great. T-tops aren't known for breaking. But if these would have ended up using the fancy Series 7 pickups, yeah, then we could have had some historic issues. In my opinion, T-tops are the better sounding pickups versus the super humbuckers in Series 7. But ultimately, the reason why I don't think these got the Series 7s is because they weren't out yet when this was first designed. But how cool is that? A whole bunch of the Les Paul parts. That's everything that was in the package. Pay no attention to that. Yeah, I saved the best for last. This was one of those finds that was just like, you've gotta be kidding me. Somebody absconded off with one of these? So the Les Paul utilized Austrian maple. Gibson had purchased it from a reputable luthier. I think he had just died or was liquidating his business, something like that. So this is like really good centuries old, super highly figured maple stuff. That's why the Les Paul looks so different from all other maple guitars. So when this guy told me he has a new old stock The Les Paul neck, I was like, really? This is the other one that got my phone call real quick. And you can just tell the figuring on this one matches the figuring that you would find on a fine guitar. Now, my best guess is this is a factory reject. Maybe they did a bit too much chiseling right here. I mean, it looks like you could still round it out and it would be just about right. Maybe this is just how these look in the raw process as they're forming the giant honkin' volutes these things always have. It's always funny, the Kalamazoo guys, they didn't embrace the volutes quite at first, but once they started getting them, they did them chonky. For comparison's sake, if you don't believe me, here's the Steve Howe TLP. Then here's a really good example of it, the giant natural one. And here's a rare look at the face of the headstock without a veneer over top of it. Man, they could have just got away with putting the inlays in and not doing the rosewood veneer. That headstock's looking pretty cool. Then down here at the heel, they don't quite have that formed yet, but you'd put the tendon into the body. But what's really cool is we can see some of the mystery markings. So you got a C on here. I'm not sure what that's about. But then we do indeed have a date stamp. This was crafted August 23rd, 1977, the second official year of the Les Paul model. Down here, we can even see the maple block capping off the truss rod. But what's even cooler than the neck is look at this, my friends. A new old stock, not even glued onto the thing, fretboard. And that's what makes TLPs so special. The abalone inlays, they just have a certain characteristic to them. They're not like ultra crazy like you'll find today with all the different colorations. Remember, Gibson wasn't really using abalone all that much. They just have like some characteristic eye formations and some other colors built into it. A lot of people don't even realize these are abalone because they kind of just look like mother of pearl. But you can tell the binding still sticks up quite a lot, but it does have the multi-layers of binding, the red and black. But this is not even formed yet. Like you can look at the edge, you can see how tall that is. That's because it's really sticking up. But these are crafted with a rosewood ebony rosewood fretboard. So even these things are really fancy. Well, I was curious about the backside of the neck that you don't normally see, but how about the other side of the fretboard? Oh man, it's got the factory markings. The Les Paul, little Gibson stamp right there. The Les Paul written out again. It looks a little bit more completed because the binding's flush on the back. Man, yeah, that's cool. And then did I show you, you also got the abalone side marker inlays? But by far the coolest thing to me is this little rubber stamper on it. Because there actually is an acoustic model that utilizes something similar to this fretboard. It's one of the higher end MK series guitars. And you know what? I just noticed something. The end of the fretboard actually is milled all the way down right here. But here is the underside to the Les Paul neck. It's kind of interesting. I didn't know that they'd be routing out a little area right here. But you can see that maple block for our truss rod there. It basically just keeps it within the neck because they have to route it out to inlay it. It's basically like a Fender skunk stripe just on the side of the guitar neck that you don't see. But man, look at that figuring. And then down here we have our tenon. It looks like we have another route, and then this is where you anchor your truss rod. So whenever we talk about maxed out truss rods, somebody's cranking away on this, pulling the rod up, and you get the thread showing. Usually what's happening is down here, the anchor is starting to compress the wood. What a cool piece of history. But I know what you're thinking. Did he have the headstock veneer? He did. Well, kind of. So from what I remember of our chats, he bought this from a friend a long time ago, and he kept the headstock veneer, and he put it on one of his Project SGs, which kills me. Because that's one of my favorite things about the Les Paul. It's a wooden veneer with the mother of pearl inlays. It's got all the multicolored binding, and they're really cool. So to have one of those new old stock, unfinished, something like this in my collection, that would have been awesome. But having that, you know, it's tempting just to make a guitar out of this stuff. But I think from the historian side of things, you're never going to find new old stock parts like these hardly ever again. So I think it's best just to leave it as is and maybe make a cool display of it. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm hiding the body somewhere. We've got everything else. Unfortunately, no. I would have never imagined a new old stock TLP neck and all this other stuff would even exist yet today. However, the bodies were used as they started to run out of the fancy parts. This is the very first super custom ever made. You can check out this episode if you'd like. It's the only one that still utilizes the wooden binding. I would imagine, unless there was a defect with the body, that they just repurposed it into something else like this or my super standard that we still need to redocument. But do not click off yet, my friends. I do have one last thing. This is something no one has ever seen before. This is an in-process the Les Paul knob, done up on a little honeycomb stick. So apparently this is how they made them. Remember how I was showing you earlier the metal insert on them to install it to the pot? Well, in order to put this on what I would assume would be the lathe machine to spin this around so they can get the concaved carving to it, they would glue a little wooden dowel in it to put it on the machine to do it. But the story is, this guy, he lives up in Kalamazoo. He's got a great collection of a whole bunch of new old stock stuff. Eric Ernest was just at his house. I think that's why I ended up getting the email. So thank you again, Eric, for a nice little lead here. But this one was never completed, just left with the wooden dowel in it. But speaking of Eric Ernest, don't forget, he also gifted me this from the Maudie Moore estate. This is the original pantograph machine outline to create the Les Paul truss rod covers. So the engraving that you see on here, there's basically a giant machine that follows the outline of this in a larger format, and then it does all the fine detail work, and then somebody does the sanding and all that. So this is still one of my favorite gifts of all time. And I'm very happy to add all this to my The Les Paul shrine. So now I just need to find new old stock pickguard, your poker chip, switch tip, and a body, and I could just build a brand new one and make it Pelham Blue. But no, most likely this will just end up as a display in the future museum. So troglodytes, I know it's a niche topic, but I hope you enjoyed anyway, because I just love the Les Pauls. Take care.